welcome back to the Disruption Lounge. My name is Ben Baer. I'm the executive editor for Fast Company, and I'm excited to be joined to talk about this session today because literally I think I get probably 2 or 3 questions a week, like what is the future of work? What is the future of the workplace? Where are things going? At Fast Company, it's something that we're constantly looking at and covering as part of the innovation of what is coming next. But also there's a lot of different facets to the workplace and the workplace experience and what is coming. So that's what we're going to have a conversation today about, not only the workplace experience, but what role trust and security plays in all parts of that. So let's start off. What exactly is a workplace experience? What is it to you?
Yeah, the workplace experience covers a lot of things. Day to day, we are working. And so what we do as workers and how we engage with different parts of the organization, how we engage with our coworkers, that's the experience. What's also part of this is we don't necessarily just work with people within the company. We work with contractors, we work with third parties, we work with various different companies. So the way that we engage with those different third parties and all those different organizations, that's all part of the experience. And what gets really difficult about this is that, there's probably traditional ways that we've done this. A lot of interactions historically may have been in person, but the work environment has changed. There's a lot of remote work. There's work, different time zones. There's different geographies. There's different environments. So all of that coming together with different personas and different people, that is the workplace experience.
Yeah. So what does that term mean to you and the clients you work with? We heard a little bit about that, but it's, there's also this thought process you're talking about of the workplace used to be the corporate office and maybe some satellite locations. Now it's homes, and it's not just employees, it's contractors too. So what does the secure workplace environment mean to you?
Is no longer a place, it's an activity, right? And certainly when you think about the pandemic and the implications of a lot of our clients and most organizations having to support an entirely remote workforce overnight, that certainly changed the dynamic of what work is, right? It's no longer a place, it's an activity. And people wanted, employees and the workforce wanted the flexibility to be able to work from wherever they wanted, right? So from home when they were in lockdown, from the office when they could go in, from remote locations all over the world. Not only did they want the flexibility to be able to work from wherever they wanted, but also with a myriad of devices. So to Daniel's point, not only are we supporting different geographical locations of users connecting, but also the different devices and device types. The workforce and the connectivity to the workforce and the user experience for the workforce has certainly evolved. And as we continue to go forward in this hybrid work environment, we'll continue to see some of those trends and modern technologies to be able to enable that hybrid workforce.
Yeah, and the complexity of all of that has certainly grown, right? I mean, there was BYOD was the thing. It was like, okay, we're going to let you bring your personal devices into work and incorporate that. But now that has also expanded into, all right, we're going to bring, this work device into your own personal home and those exposures. And we're also going to bring this experience of the workplace to anywhere, whether it's your home, the digital nomad lifestyle where you're living somewhere, temporarily, to, all right, the secure office space that you typically had, but every day it's a different experience. So I'm interested to see, all right, for organizations that you're working with, how are they tackling this challenge, and what are some of the best practices that are coming out of it?
So, the clients that are doing it well are the ones that are trying to create a consistent workforce experience, regardless of where a user connects from, what device a user connects to from, and what they're trying to connect to, right? So having a consistent user experience, regardless of what the parameters are that a user is connecting into the environment. That's very hard to do. Certainly with legacy technologies like VPN technology or VDI, virtual desktop infrastructure, those technologies were not fit for purpose for that type of connectivity, right, paradigm. And so we're seeing a lot of clients shift towards more software-defined networking, secure access service edge or SASE solutions, things like that can enable that consistent user experience and have the same level of security controls around every connection attempt, regardless of where a user is connecting from, what they're connecting from, and where they're connecting to.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ben, one thing I would add is that, we are seeing quite a big variety in terms of like what different firms are using. There are some situations it's a little bit more traditional. It's like, you must do this, you must use this. We're going to define exactly how you do it. And it may take a long time to do that. They're going to do, like very long background checks. So it serves a purpose. There are times where that actually works pretty well. But it's not a great experience. And the ability to be agile and flexible to different environments and different scenarios, there's just not a lot of flexibility there. But on the flip side, there are things where there's a lot more, like options that Ed talked about. That you could, allow you to use your mobile device. You could use different types of devices wherever you are in the world. But it's this constant battle of like how much friction we're going to introduce. And it gives you a lot more flexibility, but it's always difficult to find that right balance that works well to let you do what it is that you want to get out of it.
Yeah, well, there's the need to be flexible and open so that people can be productive, right, and not feel limited, while at the same time protecting the organization from having exposures to, unfortunately, sort of the outside forces that you don't want them to be exposed to. So I'm interested to hear about sort of like the stakeholders in this. Obviously, IT has to play a big role as part of this sort of overall structure, but there's got to be other departments that have to be involved in this.
Yeah, a big piece of this, and we actually run into this a lot. But being a professional services firm, and I promise we're not trying to be self-serving here. But when we do work for our clients, we go through a whole onboarding process, and we've probably seen every scenario of what works and doesn't work. There's a lot of people. It's there's human resources, there's contracting, there is security, there is technology. And then there's also kind of making sure that we're working with our business stakeholders. So there's no shortage of stakeholders.
I think I just add to that, fundamentally organizations should think about the user experience that they're creating. And to the point that you just made, it touches upon various stakeholders. Obviously there's the IT department, the help desk, right, has to understand kind of their role in the process. Training and awareness, and also the cybersecurity organization as far as what controls need to be in place. How do you onboard those controls in the most frictionless way possible to be able to quickly and in an agile way connect those users and all the different personas as you onboard new users into the environment. So it is important to have an understanding of bringing those different stakeholder groups together to make sure that the end-to-end process covers all the different aspects of the organization that are going to be affected. By bringing in users, by offboarding users, by elevating users, moving users around, all of those different scenarios.
Yeah, and design, right? I mean, it's sometimes a lot like last thought of thing of like, here are the things that we need to have done, but designing an experience that is important means you got to have a design type person in there to think through, okay, what does this really look like for the end user and how they're going to end up employing it? You mentioned personas. Contractors, freelancers, third parties are a part of this ecosystem that we're just describing of the new work environment. So what do organizations need to think about as more, thought is into, okay, how do I balance the needs of my staff and employees along with the third parties I need to come on? I mean, you talked about onboarding for your clients, right? What does that sort of new process look like in terms of the persona, the contractor, the third party for this experience that we're talking about?
So you got to realize there's no one size fits all to a user onboarding journey. And that's because of the myriad of types of personas that you need to onboard, right? So you have regular, employee workforce employees. You have privileged users, those that need, system administration access. You also have third parties and consultants that probably have to have a limited type of role. And then you also have service accounts, right? When you think about identity, right? It's the myriad of all these different types of accounts that need to be created in the system. And a lot of clients are moving toward a zero trust model. And basically the zero trust model just implies that you're removing any implicit trust from the environment, right? So taking an identity-based access control posture across the organization and making sure that when identities are built in the system, there are certain restrictions around what that identity can do, where it can go, what it can access, under what conditions, from what geographies, things like that, right? So making sure that you understand the myriad of personas and the different account types and how to restrict those accounts to least privileged, what they need to access and when they need to access it, and nothing more, right? That's the fundamental concept of zero trust as it relates to taking an identity-based access control posture and limiting the risk of lateral movement from those accounts.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I would add is we do need to think about the persona. Like, there's a client that we had worked with, and they followed the same process for everybody, regardless of what they did. So they had contracted out their facilities. So people who do maintenance on the building and, people who do like the cleaning. They created IDs for each of these people. And we're like, okay, well, why do you need to do that? So we had to re-engineer and think about, okay, well, does it make sense for them to do this? So this is one of those things where you take a large monolithic model and you say, well, this is what we do for every person, and really think about what makes sense. Do I actually need to provision access for these people? Because it just hasn't been thought about, from a user experience for the different personas.
So with the clients you work with, where does that conversation need to happen? So it's like, okay, you have a one-size-fits-all process. You need to think about this a little bit differently. Who should be leading that charge? Is it the CTO, the CIO, CSO? Who should be thinking about this as the sort of starting point leader for this discussion?
Yeah, I mean, it varies pretty significantly, and it's really tough for, somebody like, we're at a security conference, but, security does play a pretty significant role, and largely because that's where access is provisioned, how we provision employees, how we provision contractors. We provide a lot of the technology that's going to enable this. So, who owns it? It's difficult to say, but I think security plays a pretty significant role around facilitating this, driving the process so that we could redesign it, and then really kind of bringing all the different stakeholders. But, I think the technology kind of comes together through security.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, fundamentally, the organizations that are able to create those different user journeys effectively are the ones that have their identity and access management systems in order, right? Consolidated and federated so that they can take identity-based access control decisions across the stack, across the enterprise. However, when you think about, organizations with different lines of business, ultimately it's up to the line of business that a user may sit in, right? So if it's a third party that's serving that line of business, if it's a workforce, call center person that supports that line of business, ultimately they need to be involved in the decisions of what this user can access, what this user account is allowed to access under what conditions. But the way that that's enforced is through typically a centralized identity and access management system or systems, which are typically, run by the security organization.
So we've obviously talked a lot about the reasons, like what to do and what sort of the things to protect against, but there's got to be a lot of benefits of moving towards this type of like workplace experience. So can you share a little bit about sort of, the benefits, the innovations that can come out of having something set up like this?
Yeah, I mean, two major things come to mind for me is efficiency, which ultimately results in significant cost savings. And you actually have a much more secure environment when you do this. So then on the efficiency part, if you think about what's involved, we talk about stakeholders. There are so many steps with onboarding and with bringing on people and with offboarding. And there are so many parts of the organization. And more times than not, it's a very ad hoc thing. We have forms, paper forms, phone calls, like this, any form of communication to kind of do this. And it's inherently just very inefficient. It wastes time, takes forever to get people productive. And there's a big opportunity to increase efficiency. And candidly, we have a stronger, more secure environment when you actually know where things are at along the way.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely the efficiency angle, and there's also a cost optimization play, right? So greater operational efficiency, lower costs, and ultimately what you're trying to do is drive business agility. And the more you can automate some of these processes and the more that you can create a better user experience, again, for the myriad of different personas, the more it'll enable the business to drive fast and move forward fast.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone ever said, "Oh, I enjoy the orientation process of getting on board." It always feels like multiple hours of sitting and filling things out. Where it's like, okay, would that time be better used being actual like business orientation necessarily versus like just the fun foundational orientation? Um, what are there some of innovations that can come out of this process for companies? Is it flexibility? Is that allow them to sort of say, all right, I can now really scale my organization a little bit more versus just the hub and spoke model that maybe I started, had 5, 10 years ago?
Yeah, so certainly those legacy technologies like VPN technology, right? Those were not built with inherent scalability in mind, right? And so those organizations that relied on, appliance-based VPN solutions really struggled with the need to support the entirely remote workforce overnight with the pandemic. And so what we saw was this shift towards software-defined networking, secure access service edge, more, zero trust aligned type of capabilities that are built in the cloud and have native and inherent scalability and flexibility that the cloud can provide. And so we're seeing a lot of shift to these modern technologies. But with that shift, you have to understand that the user experience is now different, right? And so you have to bring the users along, and there's got to be an element of user education and awareness as you modernize these controls, right? So VPNs were created to make you feel as if you're sitting in your office space, even if you're working from home or working from the beach, right? And so that's fundamentally against the concept of zero trust, where you're trying to restrict access, right? You don't want to give somebody unfettered access when they're working remotely. And so if you're moving to a software-defined type of solution that really enforces least privilege, well, now the user experience as far as what a user should expect when they connect into the environment, how do they request access to get to certain applications that were just inherently available to them before. So that user experience is fundamentally going to change, and you have to bring along the training and awareness to make those users understand, what's changing, why it's changing, and how things are going to be going forward. And then also when we talked about stakeholders, you also have to educate the help desk now, right? So access control requests are going to look different. So how does the help desk understand what those new types of requests are going to look like and how to support the user base, right? So all of that needs to be taken into consideration, especially, the education of the user and the people that support them.
I think there's also, you get the chance to do things that you were restricted to before. So for example, if there's some body of work which is remote in some remote location and you need to get something done in 4 days, historically we would have said, oh, why I can't do that. And why can't I do that? Well, I can't get the people on board in time. I can't do this. There's 50 reasons why we couldn't do it. But with a kind of agile environment where we can bring people on very quickly in a secure way, you just enable the work to do that. So there's just a lot of business opportunities that you could pursue that you open up the doors. You say, okay, yeah, I could do this now.
A little bit of a different question, but like acquisitions, right? I mean, that's oftentimes another onboarding experience, but at a more of a scale thing where, all right, I got to integrate this company. Any advice for companies in terms of like, all right, when you're trying to sort of bring in that workplace experience for a large amount of people at the same time that may have been used to doing things differently where they worked previously, but now part of a larger organization. Any thoughts on that you could share?
Acquisitions are an interesting one because you're integrating two disparate organizations that have very different processes, very different endpoints, very different, the way that they manage their identities could be very different. And you have to enable the cross connectivity across those environments, but do so in a secure way. I'm working with one organization right now that is going through an M&A type of transaction. It takes them anywhere from a year to 5 years to fully integrate the people, the processes, the technologies, the endpoints into that environment, into that federated environment. And so what do they do in that interim, right? Again, I think the shift towards some of these zero trust aligned, software defined solutions, like our own zero trust access solution, can actually enable that cross collaboration and connectivity in a secure way, because you're not relying on connecting networks to networks, which again opens up a very broad set of threats across, lateral movement and other types of threats. But you're pinpointing users that can access certain applications under certain conditions, and being able to enforce that, very granular conditional access for the user base as you integrate these organizations, that's really the way to go about it. And that's why we're seeing, again, another uptick in these zero trust or SASE aligned technologies and the way that they can support M&A transactions, whether it's an acquisition or a divestiture.
Yeah, I like that one too, Andrew, because with zero trust access, you've got to change things pretty safely, pretty quickly as the environment evolves. Which historically is difficult to do.
I mean, is zero trust, do we expect that's going to be kind of the trend moving forward to this sort of experience overall, which is for IT organizations, like, let's start there and have a practice and a policy for that?
I mean, this may be a little self-serving because I lead zero trust as an offering, so I would say yes. But really, look, zero trust is a conceptual framework. I'd say 90% of the vendors on this floor are calling themselves a zero trust vendor. And so there's a lot of noise in the system of what that is and what that means. And there's no one size fits all, right? There's no kind of one answer. This is zero trust. So I would argue with anyone that claims otherwise. But at the end of the day, the concepts and the guiding principles of a zero trust framework, which is really to enforce least privilege, take an identity-based access control posture, have conditional and dynamic access control policies. Those are all capabilities or guiding principles that organizations should strive towards. And it enables, but also secures the modern workforce, right? And so that's really what it's about, is the shift towards zero trust kind of helps with that agility and that enablement of the modern kind of IT ecosystem.
Yeah, I imagine zero trust is probably right after generative AI in terms of buzzwords that are floating around in this environment. Let's talk a little bit about sort of threat actors and the concern over, all right, internal challenges with, okay, the human piece of this. What is the perspective? What should people be thinking about within these frameworks that we're talking about with the human piece of it and threat actors and how that plays a role?
Yeah, I mean, people is a huge component of this. And you may ask before, who are our stakeholders? And so there's often a insider threat technology or program component that needs to be baked into this. Because as you're bringing on people into your organization who are going to have access to your data and assets, you really need to kind of make sure that we're also zeroing in on the insider threat as well. And so this is the opportunity to do that, and it's an important stakeholder to this. And there's a lot of work that we do. And the idea isn't that, we're trying to stop all activity. It's, make sure that you're monitoring for these difficult types of abuse cases and you're able to act on it, because that is a threat actor amongst others.
Yeah. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, a lot of these modernized controls, the added benefit to them is that they enhance the telemetry and analytics that are produced within the environment, right? And so, again, I keep ragging on VPN technology, but VPN technology, you're basically only looking at traffic going in and out of the perimeter of the VPN. With these modernized controls, you're not just looking at what we call north-south traffic, but you can look at east-west traffic. So what's happening between workloads, right? This database is connecting to this application, and all of a sudden it starts connecting to a different one. So having the telemetry to understand traffic patterns, not just north-south, but across east-west within the environment, and being able to learn what normal and what good looks like, and being able to spot anomalous activity, and not only spot it because of your enhanced telemetry, but in an automated way, take some type of action to isolate that environment until you understand what's going on. And so the technology has really matured to the point where you can make those dynamic and automated access control decisions and remediation actions to be able to isolate potential threats before they, wreak havoc on the environment.
Yeah, and I mentioned AI earlier, and I got to imagine that AI is that's a tool, right, where what you just described is something that you would hope be an application for monitoring all that traffic and looking for those anomalies, because honestly, asking a human to look for it is a very difficult endeavor, yes, but having AI to assist a human to say, hey, these are certain things that we saw that were not necessarily a typical use case. Which of these should we look into further to framework like that? Is that where a direction we're probably going to go in terms of for all organizations to be able to scale that, hopefully that ability to have that?
Yeah, that's already the direction that it's headed. the challenge, as you mentioned, is always how do you find all this in the massive data sets we have, and AI is the perfect tool for doing that. Now, with the challenge with that also is that, it's how do you kind of get the right models? How do you train this with the right data? That's not easy. But that's, I think, what's actually really interesting and exciting about this new paradigm that we're moving towards with AI, for sure.
All right, so I want to end with advice from both of you, because you work with a lot of clients, a lot of different customers. I imagine there's some commonalities in terms of certain things that keep coming up and the advice you give to them. So if you could each kind of share with us and the audience sort of what is some common advice, especially about this workplace experience topic that we just talked about for the last 25 minutes.
Well, sir. I think it's really important to keep in mind the user experience. So a lot of organizations are very monolithic in their approach, and Daniel mentioned it earlier, like, this is the way we do things, and that's just the way we do things. And I think more and more end users are looking for flexibility, they're looking for mobility, and it's important to make sure that the technologies and the processes that we're building, that any organization is building, can support those dynamic user experiences. One of the things we mentioned earlier is virtual desktop technology, VDI technology. A lot of organizations leverage virtual desktop technology to secure the remote workforce and third parties. And that comes at a very significant cost, not just from a monetary perspective in the infrastructure and the software licensing and the need to package the applications and present them in the VDI environment, but it's a pretty terrible user experience. I mean, I use it when I serve a lot of my clients. It's a terrible user experience, especially for locations with low bandwidth, right? And so there's a shift towards modernized technologies. We have our own zero trust access solution, which can be seen as an alternative to some of those, VDI and VPN type of technologies, and fundamentally focuses on the user experience and creating a dynamic and agile user experience to support the mobility and the flexibility that the workforce is desiring.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of constraints that we limit ourselves to when we think about what is the right experience, how do we re-engineer this, and we're tied to the old way of doing things. And it's you can't blame people. That's just what we're used to. That's how we do it. But I think a lot of times we just have to really challenge ourselves. Think about this differently. Think about all the benefits of this, and try to balance that with what we're trying to protect. Really give a good user experience. Like we can't have the constraints of how we think about this, is we're going to re-engineer and look to the future, because that's happening now, and our old constraints are going to be what really limits us.
So flexibility, no one size fits all, but really thinking about the user experience at the end is kind of some of the common themes that kind of came across with what we were talking about, to hopefully lead to a disruptive future. So anyway, thank you for sharing your insights with us. I think it was a really good conversation. Behalf Fast Company and Deloitte, thanks for sharing and sitting with us, and hope you guys learned something that you guys can apply to your own organizations as well. Thanks, and a round of applause for our guests. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.